Hi everyone, and welcome to this tiny training on how to approach journalism debates. Obviously, given that this is a tiny training, we won't have time to go through everything and all of the content pieces that you would normally go through in a training that has the normal length, but I will run you through what I believe to be the main three stakeholders of this debate. And I will give you content pieces that I think are oftentimes missing from the journalism debates and that usually end up making them quite simplistic or quite reductionist, whereas I think there is significantly more nuance that could be brought in such debates in order to help you win this. So without further ado, journalism debates are nothing incredibly fancy. They're not a very specific type of debate where you require a certain skill. It mostly requires you to understand how news generation and news propagation works in society and what are the kind of pockets that these news fall into and what are the pockets and the boxes in which journalists fall into. So I think as long as you have this and you use this kind of characterizations for your framings or for your arguments, I think it will increase your chances of having a good and qualitative journalism debate. That being said, the first and obvious stakeholder are journalists. Who are they? How do we debate about them? The first thing to say about them is that they're not homogeneous and they should not be treated as such because as all people in all professions, they have different employment types, they have different incentives, there are different people who do these kinds of things for very, very different reasons. So the first element on journalists is how they are employed. There are broadly three types of employment. The first one is you have signed a contract, an exclusive contract usually, with a media outlet. This means that your work exclusively goes to them. This means that your intellectual property belongs to them. And this means that also you get your salary from them. They pay for your health benefits, for your security, everything. This is obviously a more stable type of employment and is considered to be by some is considered to be the desirable type of employment because you have stability, because you have a stable guaranteed income, but it also means you are more dependent on that outlet and you are more dependent on the direction they want to push the outlet onto. So you have less freedom but more benefits. The second type are people who are somewhere in between. They don't work for one media company, they're not bound to that, but they collaborate with two or three and they work with them usually in intellectual property rights contracts. This means that they are somewhat tied to the idea, to the image of those outlets. But obviously, given that there is more of them, they have a lot more flexibility. They can probably move from one to another if something blows up in one of them. So they have somewhat stable employment, but it is more self-search. It is more of a self-search. You need to find those outlets and they need to want to collaborate with you. The third type of employment are the people who are entirely freelancers, who are not associated significantly with any sort of outlet, who usually do blogs or create content and promote their content on their own. They don't use any resources. This also from an outlet. This means that they have entire freedom about how what they publish, about how their schedule is, but it also means they have all of the responsibilities that self-employment usually brings about. What are their incentives? And here, I think a lot of times journalists are portrayed as all of them are people who are very, very passionate about truth and about investigations, and that is correct. Some people, maybe most people that work in journalism, do care about uncovering things and about informing the public, but that doesn't mean they don't have potentially competing incentives, such as financial incentives. There are a lot of journalists who choose to do less interesting things or who choose to work for more, traditional classic media outlets, maybe outlets that don't necessarily fully align with their ideological views because they offer stable employment, because they offer significantly better salaries, or who choose a niche of the field that brings them more money. It can also be security. For some people, it would be incredibly stressful to be self-employed. So then they would choose stability even over money or even over the fight for truth that most people want. There are people, on the other hand, who would never associate themselves or who would never risk associating themselves with outlets because that would mean they could potentially at some point get a gag order, which is something they don't want to expose themselves to. So just as with other people and other professions, you do have people who care about truth and about spreading correct information, but they're also humans. They also care about income. They also care about stability. Sometimes, some of them also care about ideology and how is the outlet that they work for. Thirdly, all journalists should, and most journalists do, follow a deontological code that sets out the basic rules that no journalists that respects themselves or no journalist that wants to be taken into consideration and be taken seriously would ever step over. These are things such as you will always check what you publish from 3 reliable sources, ideally sources that are government or authorities, official authorities you can trust. Secondly, you will always protect your sources. If your source tells you that they want to remain anonymous, then the deontological code says you will never disclose who they are, and you will do whatever possible to protect them and protect their identity. There are journalists who have gone to prison because they have refused to disclose the identity of one of their sources in a trial, because this is an incredibly strong rule that is at the base of being a journalist, because you are nothing without your sources. These people do you a favor by telling you things, and as such, you undertake the duty to protect them. The third one is respecting the source's preferences. That is, there are 2 ways in which a source, a person who wants to tell you something, can come to you with information. They can, 3 sources, 3 ways actually. They can come to you and say they want to be on the record. This means that you can publish their name, you can publish what they told you, you can take quotes from what they told you. It is all out in the open. They can tell you things on background. This means that you are not allowed to tell who they are, where you got this information from, but you can tell the information. You can say things such as sources close to the president or sources close to the hospital have revealed that, and then you say the information. When you say this kind of phrasing, it means that that source is on background. They are okay with the information being published, but not who they are. And lastly, there are sources who only agree to tell you something on deep background, which means that you are neither allowed to publish who they are, neither you're allowed to say the information that they gave you. They're only giving you this information as a lead that you can then follow and find new things about, but they are too afraid to publish this, or they're concerned that this could be traced back to them. So nothing that they told you can ever come to light in any way, shape, or form. Part of your deontological code as a journalist is to respect this preference and to inform the person and ask this person for which preference they have before you publish this, ideally at the beginning of your discussion, in order to respect it. Specializations. Again, like most other jobs, journalists also have specializations. I feel like sometimes they are treated as a homogeneous class. Everybody writes about everything, but that is inaccurate. Most people spend 20 years of their life doing healthcare journalism or political journalism or economic journalism or social journalism or whatever else. And moving from one side to the other obviously is like making quite a big career shift, because you have all of your sources from a specific niche of journalism. You have knowledge in that space. You know who are your readers. You know what is expected of you inside that niche. What is the kind of understanding that your readers have of, for example, let's say, economic mechanisms. And whenever that niche dies out, Let's say you work in tech journalism and the tech world starts being significantly more divorced from journalism and from the public, then moving to something else is literally a huge career shift for you. So you can't just like move around. Not everybody does news. A lot of people do in-depth pieces on one specific topic that they have specialized in for the last 20 years. And lastly, accountability. Who keeps the journalists accountable? There isn't a council like you have with doctors, right? Or there isn't necessarily a board that supervises all of the journalists because it is inherently a more liberal profession. There are people who are somewhere on the verge. You don't need qualifications, official diplomas. It's helpful if you have them, but you can do journalism even if you don't have a diploma. There are, however, a lot of ways to keep them accountable. Firstly, obviously, the public, the readers, the people inside the domain, you do not want to look like a joke to your peers. But also there are professional organizations, and some countries do require you to have the green light from that professional organization in order to allow you, for example, to cover things, official things, or in order to allow you to go in war zones. And if you break the deontological code, those organizations can either revoke your license, if that is a thing that the country has, or they can at least, give you warnings or suspend you. They don't have full power. They can't necessarily stop you from acting as a journalist, but they can impede upon your options to do so. And obviously, you have a lot of overwatch from your editors, which we are currently getting into. Your editor is the person who reads your article, who says whether or not this is fine, whether or not this goes to publishing, is the person who cuts information, who adds information. So they have quite a big sway into how your article or your video eventually looks like. So then, what kind of media outlets are there? There are three types of outlets. The first one are public outlets. This usually looks like public television and public radio stations who are funded by taxes from the government collected from the people, and they have to serve a information purpose. Because they're funded by taxpayers' money, their purpose should be to educate the people. They're also the ones who technically should be impartial. During presidential races, for example, they should not take sides. They should remain entirely impartial because they should not be partisan to any of the parties that fund them or that work in the government. Then you have the private outlets, which are outlets owned by somebody. Sometimes that somebody is a billionaire. Sometimes that somebody is a mafia boss. Sometimes that somebody is somebody who does a lot of shady things in the country and is looking for a way to communicate with the public by creating a TV station or a newspaper. And lastly, you have the independent outlets who are not owned by anyone. They are entirely self-funded. Usually they are funded by donations from the readers, and usually they're funded by grants, for example, from the European Union. A lot of times, these are the outlets that come up with the most pervasive investigations into the deep corruption, for example, because by definition, they are not tied to anyone. Their purpose is to step on people's toes, but it also means they're the most vulnerable. When there is a crisis, when people stop giving donations, they're the first ones to go. And they also have very little human resources because they're self-funded. What degree of editorial freedom do outlets have? I think there is a misconception that outlets who are private never have freedom, and outlets who are, for example, public always have freedom, which is wrong. There are people who own private newspapers or private television who do care about informing the people and who do want objective news and correct positions by political analysts, and who will give a lot of editorial freedom to the editors, to the head editors, and they will not input their own political ideas into the outlet and into what the outlet does. Obviously, some private owners, especially the ones who want to spread propaganda, for example, Russia-owned outlets in Eastern Europe, will use it in order to push a political agenda. They will spread misinformation, but that is not always the case. Just because something is privately owned doesn't mean it necessarily becomes biased. It means it has higher chances of becoming biased, but it is not something automatic. So generally, editorial freedom does depend on who runs you, but it also depends on how your editor is. Let's say you're a public television. Let's say you are allowed to be and encouraged to be impartial, but you have a head editor or a head member of the board who is incredibly politically biased, or who has a very strict conception of how news should look like. Given that it is a hierarchical structure, if they say something doesn't go, you are entirely limited by your editor. So sometimes the gag orders don't necessarily come from the owners. They can come from lower down as well, from editors of departments. So they can appear at any point. Or on the other hand, the reverse side of this, freedom can come from your editors who fight for you in front of the board, or who fight for you in front of the owner. Pace. As I'm sure you're aware, the newsrooms usually work on a 24-hour pace. So they have news 24 out of 7. They need to produce hundreds of pieces of information weekly, as opposed to other ones, such as the independent media outlets, who work on a more chill pace. They publish once in a while when they have an investigation ready. They can allow themselves to take more time. Their purposes, as I already flagged, can be information. Their purposes can be financial. They can have shit shows or shit things that bring them a lot of money. They can have a mixed purpose. Some of them have propaganda purposes, but not all newspapers or not all media outlets have the same purposes, and not all of them evolved the same. There are a lot of traditional TV stations, for example, that still hold a big part of the demographic of the country who still watches TV. But that demographic has decreased significantly in the past 10 or 20 years. So then, even if it is still the main TV station in the country, it maybe has influence over 20% of the country because it's mostly watched by elderly people, because they're the only ones who are left watching the news on TV. There are, on the other hand, new media forms. You have TV channels who exist exclusively on YouTube and through live streams on social media. You have social media platforms for literally all of the new media news outlets. You have, for example, outlets who are targeted a specific demographics, for example, young people, and who function exclusively on Instagram, for example. So in the last maybe 5 or 10 years, you have had a big insurgence of digital media and of significantly less traditional outlets. This means less overwatch, but it also means more flexibility. Maybe they reach their target audience better. Lastly then, who is the public? I think people generally have this misconception that everybody reads the news and everybody is somewhat informed. That is pretty simplistic. There are people who read the news frequently. These are the people who you would expect take their information from more sources, who have a very clear view of what outlets are reliable, what outlets are not, and they also frequently go through more outlets in order to get informed. You have the casual readers, people who read some news, are somewhat aware, but they can still be fooled because they're not super immersed in this. And you have people who are entirely uninterested, and very importantly, that don't trust the media. I think there's very valuable framing to make in journalism debate that is about whether or not the population of that country or the subgroup that you're talking about trusts the media. Because the other teams can prove many things about how the media is well regulated, how journalists are great. But if people in that subgroup do not trust the media, do not trust traditional media, then none of that matters. So I think it's very valuable to establish and to properly frame whether or not this debate happens in an area where the media is trusted, is somewhat trusted, or is not trusted at all. And lastly, something I would flag and you should pay attention to is what other things are the people in this group, in this space, exposed to? Are they surrounded by a lot of misinformation and alternative information sources, such as Facebook posts from shady people or shady influencers who promote anti-vaccine propaganda? Or are they surrounded by decently good news channels that most of the country watches? This depends a lot from region to region and from country to country. So I would encourage you to look at some overview about what is the proportion between media and alternative sources of information, what is the media trust in the main countries that are likely to come up in debates, in order to know what are the kind of narratives that these people already believe, because that influences a lot how receptive they will be to new information that they receive. And that comes up a lot in the journalism debates. A lot of teams claim that there is incredible impact from the qualitative information that comes from a good media outlet. That's only dependent on whether the information reaches you, whether you believe it, and whether and how it clashes with other previous beliefs you have. I hope this is helpful. Feel free to reach out for any questions.